The first time I met my fiancé's parents, I showed up late, covered in dust and wearing a shirt with a faint black streak down the sleeve. His mother looked at me like I'd just crawled out of a crime scene, and in a way I had just not the kind she thought. That evening started with a plan, a clean uniform folded neatly on my passenger seat, and a simple hope to prove that being a police officer didn't make me hard or cold or dangerous. I'd spent the morning on shift routine calls, nothing dramatic, but I still went home to shower, straighten my hair, and trade my badge for a small silver pendant. I even packed a little box of pastries from the bakery near the station, something sweet to break the ice. Evan's parents, Tom and Linda, lived in a leafy suburb about an hour outside the city. Wide lawns, quiet fences, the kind of neighborhood where everyone still waved to the mailman. He warned me they were traditional, which, in his gentle, apologetic way, meant they thought law enforcement was no job for a woman who might someday raise children. I told him not to worry, but truthfully I did. My last call before leaving the precinct ran longer than expected, a welfare check on an elderly man whose neighbors hadn't seen him in days. He was fine, just lonely, and I stayed a little too long talking about baseball and weather. By the time I changed into jeans and a blue blouse, I was already cutting it close. The drive out of town was peaceful at first. I rolled down the window, letting the late summer air cool my nerves. My car radio hummed an old country station static mixing with twang. For a moment I let myself believe that tonight would go smoothly, that maybe Tom and Linda would see past the badge, see me as Evan did. Then I saw her. Just past the county line, an old sedan sat tilted on the shoulder of the road, one tire flat, hazard lights flashing weakly in the fading light. Beside it stood a woman in her 70s, white hair in a neat bun, wearing a faded Navy veteran's cap. She was kneeling awkwardly by the wheel, holding a lug wrench that was clearly too heavy for her. I slowed instinctively. Old habits die hard. I pulled over, hit my hazards, and stepped out. "You okay, ma'am?" I asked, keeping my tone soft but firm. She looked up, her face lined but steady. "I'll be fine, dear. Just need to loosen this bolt." My husband used to handle these things. Her hands trembled slightly. The wrench slipped and clanged onto the pavement. "May I?" I asked, crouching down. She hesitated, then nodded. "Please, I'm afraid my arms aren't what they used to be." It took me a minute to see the problem. The tire iron was the wrong size, and the spare had lost pressure. I popped my trunk and grabbed my own tools habit from years of roadside assists. The air smelled like dust and warm asphalt. She watched silently as I loosened the lugs, swapped the tire, and checked the jack's seal. My blouse caught a smear of black where I wiped my hands, but I didn't notice until later. While I worked, she told me she'd served as a Navy nurse in the early 1970s. Her husband had passed last year, but she still drove his old car to keep him company. She smiled when she said it. Her name was Ruth. When the job was done, I wiped my palms on a rag. "You should stop by the next station and top that spare off," I told her. "Keep it under 50 until then." "You sound like someone who's said that a few times before," she said, eyes twinkling. "I'm a cop," I admitted, half smiling. "Off duty tonight, technically. But it's hard to turn it off." She nodded approvingly. "Then you're exactly the kind of person this world needs more of." Those words stayed with me as I watched her drive off, hazard lights blinking until they disappeared around the curve. I looked at my watch, 6:48. Dinner had started at 6. By the time I reached the Whitmore driveway, the sun had melted behind the trees, leaving everything dipped in amber shadow. Their house was classic colonial brick, white shutters, 2 flags on the porch, one American one for the local golf club. I parked my car at the far edge of the driveway, hoping the engine noise wouldn't draw attention to my lateness. Evan opened the door before I even rang the bell. His smile faltered for half a second when he saw my sleeves. "What happened?" "There was an older lady with a flat," I said. "Couldn't just leave her." He looked torn between pride and panic. "My dad's already poured the wine." I tried to laugh. "Guess I'll need a glass." Inside, everything gleamed: hardwood floors, brass lamps, a faint scent of lemon polish and roast chicken. Tom and Linda stood by the dining room doorway, picture perfect in posture and poise. Tom extended a stiff handshake. Linda offered a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So nice to finally meet you," she said. "Traffic, was it?" "Something like that," I said, keeping my tone polite. She glanced at my sleeve, then at my hands. Oh my, I hope the roads are safe out there tonight. They usually are, I replied, especially when people look out for each other. Dinner was waiting: china plates, cloth napkins, candles that flickered like they'd been lit just for show. I sat across from Linda, aware of every speck of dust on my shirt. Conversation floated politely around me. Tom's retirement, the neighbor's new roof, the price of gas. When Evan mentioned my job, Linda's fork paused mid-air. A police officer, she repeated. Goodness, that must be stressful. It has its moments, I said. Tom leaned back. Ever think of doing something safer, something with normal hours? I like helping people, I said simply. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that meant he didn't understand but wouldn't argue. The room felt 10 degrees colder. I sipped my water, smiled when appropriate, and tried not to glance at the clock. Somewhere in the distance, I thought about Ruth driving home safely on that spare tire, and a small part of me felt that being late was still the right choice. I just didn't know yet how right it was. The road home that evening still clings to my memory, the long stretch of fading sunlight across the asphalt, the hum of tires, the smell of warm dust and honeysuckle. I had already changed clothes and polished my badge earlier that day, and yet somehow fate found a way to pull me right back into the kind of moment that defines who you really are when no one's watching. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. The traffic had thinned to a trickle, the sky painted with streaks of soft orange and violet. I was half rehearsing polite dinner conversation in my head. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, the commute's not bad. No, sir, we don't get danger pay for attitude. I was smiling to myself at the absurdity of it when I saw her again. No, not Ruth yet, but a figure by the side of the road, a shape that triggered every reflex I'd trained over the years. A silver sedan sat angled toward a ditch, one tire flat, hazard lights flashing weakly. An older woman in a pale cardigan stood beside it, waving half-heartedly at passing cars. I checked my watch. 5:48 p.m. I had 12 minutes before dinner started. That quiet, reasonable voice spoke first. Someone else will stop. Then another voice, the one I live by, cut in. If you see something and can help, you do. There's no switch to turn that off. I eased my car to the shoulder and stepped out, the sound of gravel crunching under my boots. The woman turned toward me, startled but relieved. Oh, thank goodness. I thought I'd be out here till dark, she said. Her voice was firm but kind, with that distinct confidence of someone who'd seen a lot in her lifetime. I smiled. You picked a rough spot for a breakdown, ma'am. I'm Officer Hayes, off duty tonight, just heading to dinner. You okay? Her eyes flickered with recognition at the word officer, but not fear, just a small nod of understanding. I'm fine, dear. It's the car that's suffering. It's my husband's old Buick. He used to handle all this. She pointed at the jack awkwardly positioned under the frame inside. Seems I've forgotten how. I knelt beside the car, inspected the jack placement, and shook my head. You didn't do too bad. Just need to loosen these before we lift. My knees pressed into gravel as I grabbed my lug wrench. You got a spare? In the trunk, I think. She opened it and I spotted the Navy cap, first dark blue, embroidered with gold letters, USS Mercy, Navy Nurse Corps. It rested on a folded blanket next to a box of old photos. I smiled. You served. She chuckled softly. Half a century ago. Feels like another lifetime. Still counts, I said. My dad served in the Coast Guard. He used to tell me cars are like people, take care of the basics, they'll keep you going. She laughed. Then I think this one's due for a checkup. For the next 20 minutes I worked quietly while she chatted about her husband, about how they'd driven that car across the country in their youth. The wrench slipped once, smearing grease across my cuff. The smell of hot metal and rubber filled the air. A pickup truck honked as it passed the driver, giving us a thumbs up. She waved back like a queen on parade. When I finished, I tightened the last bolt and lowered the jack slowly. The car settled evenly. I wiped my hands with a rag and straightened up. All set. Donut tire will get you to the next station, maybe 15 miles. She looked at me with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. You said you're off duty. You must see a lot in your work. I hesitated, searching for the right tone. Some days are heavy, yeah, but most of the job is just showing up when someone needs a little help. Her gaze softened. Well, tonight that someone was me. You've got a good heart, Officer. Hayes, Claire Hayes. Thank you, Officer Hayes. She reached out, offering a handshake that was both frail and strong. And for the record, I don't think the uniform makes the person. The choices do. Something in her words hit deeper than she knew. I'd been bracing myself for an evening of judgment, of measuring up to expectations I never asked for. But here on a dusty roadside, a stranger reminded me why I wore the badge at all. When she climbed into her car, I reminded her about the air pressure and made sure she started safely. She rolled down the window and smiled one last time. You remind me of my daughter's stubborn kind, and always a few minutes late because of it. I laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. She drove off slowly, hazard lights flickering red against the dusky light. The moment felt small but right. Then I looked down at my self-wrinkled shirt, dusty sleeves, faint streak of grease near my elbow. I groaned. Perfect timing, Hayes, I muttered. The clock read 6:22. I was officially late. Back in the car, I cranked the AC, trying to dry the sweat from my collar. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed a smudge on my cheek and a few flyaway strands of hair from the wind. I dabbed at the dirt with a napkin, which only made it worse. I sighed, gave up, and started the car. As I pulled back onto the road, the sun was sinking low, the world turning that golden shade that makes everything look forgiving. I rehearsed my apology to Evan's parents, trying to find the words that made I stopped to help someone sound responsible instead of naive. It was funny, though, underneath the worry there was something else. Pride. A quiet satisfaction that whatever happened at dinner, I had done the right thing. I hadn't set out to prove anything to anyone, but maybe, just maybe, the night still would. Because the woman I helped wasn't done with me yet. By the time I turned onto the Whitmore's street, the sky had darkened into that pale blue just before night fully settles in. Porch lights glowed on identical houses with perfect hedges and flagpoles, the kind of neighborhood where lawns were measured and reputations manicured even more carefully. My car felt out of place here, dust on the fenders, the smell of road grit in the vents. I parked a few houses down, took one last deep breath, and checked my reflection in the mirror. The damage wasn't terrible. My hair was messy but fixable. The smudge on my sleeve was stubborn, the faint gray mark of real life refusing to wash away. I brushed at it with a napkin anyway, which only spread it slightly. So be it. I grabbed the pastry box I'd brought, the one I'd been so proud of earlier, and made the long walk up their perfectly paved driveway. Evan opened the door before I even rang the bell, his tie loosened and his face flushed with worry. You made it, he said, relief and tension fighting in his voice. Mom's been checking the clock every 5 minutes. I figured, I said softly. Sorry I'm late. There was a woman stranded on the side of the road. I couldn't just leave her. He gave me a half-smile, part admiration, part panic. You're the only person I know who'd be late to meet my parents because she stopped to change someone's tire. Guilty as charged. He took my hand and squeezed it gently. You look beautiful. I laughed. You need to get your eyes checked. When he led me inside, I was met by warmth, the physical kind, not the emotional. The air smelled of roasted chicken, lemon polish, and faint perfume. The foyer gleamed brass fixtures, family portraits in gold frames, and a spotless floor you could eat off of. Tom and Linda stood side by side near the dining room archway like well-trained hosts greeting a guest they didn't quite invite. Tom was tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who carried himself like every room was his boardroom. His handshake was firm but cold, the handshake of a man taking inventory. Linda's smile was delicate and practiced, the corners of her lips pulled tight enough to strain. So nice to finally meet you, Claire, she said. We were starting to think you got lost. I forced a smile. Not lost, just delayed helping someone on the highway. A veteran, actually. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh, how admirable. The pause before that last word carried a weight I didn't miss. Tom gestured toward the table. Well, let's not let dinner get cold. The dining room was a painting. China plates, crystal glasses, silverware that caught the candlelight. I set the pastry box near the centerpiece, instantly regretting it when I noticed the homemade pies already arranged perfectly on crystal stands. Linda glanced at my box, then at me. Oh, you brought something, she said. That's sweet. Her tone made me feel like I'd handed her a bag of takeout at a charity gala. Evan pulled out my chair beside him and I sat smoothing my blouse and hoping the faint dust didn't show under the warm lights. Conversation started politely, as these things always do. Tom asked about my daily routine, which sounded more like an interrogation than curiosity. Well, I said it depends on the shift. I work mostly days, community patrol, school visits, some traffic enforcement. We focus a lot on education now, preventing issues before they start. Linda tilted her head. That must be so stressful, seeing all that unpleasantness. Sometimes, I admitted. But I try to remember most people are good. They just need help at the right moment. Tom sliced into his chicken, still a dangerous line of work for a young woman. Ever think of something safer? I met his gaze evenly. I think about doing something meaningful. Safety's never really guaranteed in any job. His knife paused mid-cut. The silence that followed stretched just long enough to be noticed. Linda changed the subject, asking about traffic lights and community meetings, but every question carried a quiet undertone of, why this life, why you? Between courses, I caught my reflection in the polished silver water pitcher. The faint smudge on my sleeve was still there. Linda's eyes flicked toward it twice. I folded my arm casually to cover it. Evan tried to smooth things over. Mom, Dad, Claire was one of the first women in her unit to... Linda interrupted, smiling too brightly. Oh, Evan, no work talk at the table. Let's keep it light. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks but stayed quiet. There was no point proving myself with words tonight. Some people didn't believe until life itself forced them to. I took another sip of water, trying to focus on the tiny kindnesses, Evan's hand brushing mine under the table, the way the candlelight softened the sharp edges of judgment across from me. I kept my posture steady, my smile gentle, my voice calm. Years on the job had taught me that silence can speak louder than any defense. Tom leaned back after dinner, swirling his wine. So he said finally, "You've been with the force how long?" 8 years, I said. Long time, he murmured. Do you plan to stay in enforcement after marriage? The word enforcement hung in the air like something unpleasant. I plan to keep serving, I said, whatever that looks like. Linda gave a thin smile. Of course you do. Evan shifted uncomfortably. Mom. It's fine, I said, forcing a small laugh. I get that question a lot. She nodded politely, but her eyes drifted again to my sleeve. It was like she could see every hour I'd spent in uniform, every late shift, every call that didn't fit her world. Dessert was coffee and pie. I didn't have much of an appetite. I tried to make small talk, but my words felt clumsy in that polished room. When the grandfather clock in the corner chimed 7, I thought maybe it was time to cut my losses. Then from outside came a sound faint at first, then clear. Tires crunching on gravel. A car door closing. The low murmur of voices. Linda frowned. Were we expecting someone else? Tom shook his head, glancing toward the window. No. I turned toward the sound and my pulse kicked up. I knew that car. I knew that voice. The woman I'd helped was here. The knock came in 3 polite but firm taps, the kind that carried both patience and authority. Every head at the table turned toward the sound. The grandfather clock ticked once, and in that single beat of silence, I felt the air tighten like a held breath. I'll get it, Evan said, half rising, but Linda was already on her feet. No, dear, she said briskly. It's probably one of the neighbors. She glided across the polished floor, her heels whispering against the hardwood. I could see her reflection in the glass of the dining room door, back straight, shoulders poised, every movement radiating composure. Then she opened the front door, and her composure froze. Standing there framed by the porch light was the woman from the roadside. Ruth, her navy cap still perched neatly on her head, though now she wore a soft cardigan and pearls. Beside her stood a uniformed local officer, hat in hand, expression neutral but respectful. Good evening, the officer said. Sorry to interrupt. Mrs. Ellison here asked to be driven by so she could thank someone personally. Says a young lady stopped to help her with a flat tire earlier this evening. My chair scraped quietly against the floor as I stood. Ruth's eyes found mine instantly, and her face lit up with recognition. There you are, she said warmly, stepping forward. I told Officer Grady here I'd know you the second I saw you. You didn't even give me your last name, Officer Hayes. Linda blinked, utterly bewildered. You... know each other. In a way, Ruth said, smiling. She saved me from sitting on that shoulder half the night, changed my tire, refused $1, and made sure I got home safe. And when my driver finally caught up with me, I told him I wanted to come thank her properly. Tom stood up, his expression shifting from confusion to something more guarded. You're the woman she stopped for. I am, Ruth replied, and you must be her future in-laws. You should be very proud. It's not often you meet someone who stops in their nice clothes on their way somewhere important to help an old stranger in trouble. For a moment the silence was total. Linda's lips parted, but no words came out. She turned toward me, her face a mixture of surprise and faint embarrassment. You didn't say it was that kind of situation, she murmured. I shrugged lightly. It didn't seem like a big deal. Ruth chuckled. That's exactly what makes it one. Officer Grady smiled politely. Mrs. Ellison insisted we stop. Said you reminded her of someone she used to serve with, the kind who does the right thing even when it's inconvenient. Linda stepped aside awkwardly. Well, please come in for a moment. It's chilly outside. Ruth nodded graciously and stepped inside the officer, tipping his hat before leaving. Her presence filled the foyer, calm, but commanding the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need volume to be felt. She looked around, her eyes landing briefly on the family photos that lined the hallway, smiling faces, summer weddings, vacations by the lake. You have a lovely home, she said to Linda, who managed a quick, polite thank you. But I must say this young lady's kindness tonight was even lovelier. I felt my face warm. Really, it was nothing, ma'am. Oh, don't you start, Ruth said firmly, her tone playful but sure. You knelt on gravel in a blouse that probably cost more than my groceries for the month. I don't forget that kind of thing. Tom cleared his throat. You mentioned service, Mrs. Ellison. Were you in the military? Navy Nurse Corps, she said proudly. Served from 69 to 74, spent a year on the USS Mercy, back when women in uniform had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. She smiled faintly. Sound familiar, Officer Hayes. I smiled back, more than I'd like to admit. Something softened in Tom's face. He looked from Ruth to me, the faintest trace of humility creeping into his eyes. Linda, meanwhile, had gone quiet, that delicate mask of social grace slipping into something closer to reflection. I'm sorry if we interrupted dinner, Ruth continued, glancing around the table. I just wanted to say thank you properly. I've been around a long time, and I've learned you don't let good deeds go unspoken. Too many people assume kindness is just a job requirement these days, but what she did wasn't part of her duty, it was who she is. I tried to deflect with humor. Well, I wasn't about to let a Navy veteran lose a wheel in the middle of nowhere. Ruth laughed softly. That's exactly the kind of thing my late husband would have said. Evan stepped forward, smiling. Mrs. Ellison, would you like to join us for a cup of coffee? We'd be honored. Linda's eyes widened slightly, not at the invitation, but at her son's tone. He'd never sounded so firm, so sure. That would be lovely, Ruth said, resting a hand lightly on his arm. If it's no trouble. No trouble at all, Evan said. We were just finishing dessert. As Ruth joined us at the table, the atmosphere shifted almost immediately. The tension that had hung in the room like static now softened into something gentler, almost reverent. Tom straightened his posture. Linda busied herself fetching another cup, perhaps grateful for something to do. When Ruth sat beside me, she gave me a quick conspiratorial smile. See, sometimes being late puts you right on time. I chuckled quietly. I'll have to remember that one. As coffee poured and conversation resumed, the Whitmores listened more than they spoke. Ruth told a few short stories about young sailors who wrote love letters home, about holding hands with patients through long nights, about learning that compassion never made her weaker. Her words carried the kind of weight that years give you, gentle, wise, unforgettable. Before she left, she turned to Tom and Linda. You two raised a son who picked a good woman, she said softly. Don't ever mistake duty for distance. The world needs people like her. When the door finally closed behind her, the house felt different, quieter, warmer. Linda stood by the doorway for a moment, staring at nothing in particular. She's remarkable, she said softly. I nodded. Yeah, she really is. None of us spoke for several seconds. The candlelight flickered, throwing long, soft shadows across the table. For the first time that night, no one looked at my sleeve. When the door closed behind Ruth, the house stayed very still, as if it was catching its breath. The air that had felt so stiff and formal an hour ago now hung soft with the faint smell of coffee and candle wax. Evan reached over and brushed my arm under the table, a quiet, reassuring touch. His parents were both silent, though. For once, the silence didn't feel like disapproval. It felt like thinking. Linda finally spoke, her voice low, her eyes still on the door. That woman, she had a presence about her. You could tell she was someone who'd seen the world. Tom nodded slowly. Navy, she said. Served back when my brother did. He was in Vietnam. Evan looked up surprised. I didn't know Uncle Robert was in Vietnam. Tom hesitated, the kind of hesitation that tells you someone's remembering something painful. He didn't like to talk about it, he said. He came home different, nervous, drank too much for a while. My parents tried to help, but you couldn't talk about those things back then. Linda set her coffee cup down gently. I suppose that's why this whole evening hit me so hard. I tilted my head. What do you mean? She gave me a small, rueful smile. When I hear the word police, I don't just think of law and order. I think of danger, of people running toward the very things the rest of us run away from. And after what happened to Tom's brother, the worry just stuck. Her words came carefully, but they landed honest. For the first time all evening, her eyes met mine without that guarded distance. When Evan told us you were a police officer, I imagined... She trailed off, shaking her head. I imagined uniforms, sirens, danger, not kindness on a roadside. Tom cleared his throat, his deep voice quieting the room. I owe you an apology, he said, meeting my gaze squarely. I misjudged you. I thought what you did was just a job enforcing rules, keeping order. But what that woman said... He paused, searching for words. You saw a stranger who needed help, and you didn't ask who she was before you acted. That's character. That's service. I didn't know what to say, so I kept it simple. Thank you, sir. Evan grinned, the tension in his shoulders finally melting away. See, Mom, Dad, I told you she was the real deal. Linda smiled faintly. Yes, dear, you were right. There was laughter then, not loud, but genuine. The kind of laughter that starts small and grows into something easy. Tom leaned back in his chair. You know, he said, glancing toward me, I still worry about safety. That's never going away. But hearing that woman talk about what you did, well, I suppose danger isn't the only thing in your line of work. There's grace, too. I smiled. There's a lot of paperwork, too, sir. Grace is just what keeps us sane through it. Evan chuckled. Linda actually laughed, a light sound that made her seem 10 years younger. She rose, refilled my coffee without asking, and placed her hand gently on my shoulder. You must see some awful things, though, she said softly. Sometimes, I admitted. But the truth is, we see more good than bad. We see neighbors helping neighbors, veterans watching out for kids at the bus stop, families sticking together when everything goes wrong. It's not all tragedy. It's people trying. She nodded slowly, her hand still resting on my shoulder. I like that. People trying. For the first time, I felt like we were having a real conversation, not an interview. The titles officer, parent, guest fell away, leaving just people around a table. Ruth had cracked something open in all of us, a reminder that service isn't just about rank or job or even courage. It's about showing up. Tom got up and walked to a cabinet near the dining room window. He opened a drawer and took out a small wooden box. When he returned, he placed it on the table in front of me. This was my brother's, he said, a medal he earned overseas. He kept it hidden for years because he didn't think anyone cared. When he passed, I took it to remember him by. I don't usually show it to people. He opened the lid, revealing a tarnished bronze medal inside. Tonight reminded me that there are still people who live by the same kind of integrity he did. People who don't wait to be thanked. I blinked, taken aback. That's very kind of you, sir. He smiled faintly. Don't thank me, just keep being who you are. Linda reached for her wine glass. Well, she said softly, if this evening has taught me anything, it's that first impressions are not to be trusted. I thought I was meeting a cop. Turns out I was meeting someone who leads with her heart. I could feel the emotion rising in my chest. I wasn't the type to cry easily, But there was something about the sincerity in her voice, the way she said, "leads with her heart," that made my throat tighten. Ruth's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes being late puts you right on time. Dinner stretched into another hour of easy conversation. Tom told stories from his youth, Linda laughed at Evan's old college mishaps, and for the first time I felt like part of the room instead of an intruder. As we stood to say goodnight, Linda surprised me by hugging me lightly. "Thank you for being patient with us," she whispered, "and for what you did for that woman. I think I needed to see that." I hugged her back. "We all need reminders sometimes," I said. Tom extended his hand again, this time warm and steady. "We'd like to have you over again soon," he said. "Maybe next time we'll cook something for you." I smiled, "Only if I'm allowed to bring dessert again." He grinned, "Deal." As Evan and I walked out into the cool night, the moonlight spilling across the lawn, I felt something inside me settle, a quiet peace. The night that had begun with judgment had ended with understanding. And maybe I thought that was the real kind of justice. The days after that dinner unfolded like slow sunlight, after rain, warm, cautious, and new. No grand apologies arrived at my doorstep, no dramatic confessions. What changed was quieter, subtler. Tom began calling me by name instead of officer. Linda started sending small texts through Evan Recipes church announcements, a reminder that the annual VFW pancake breakfast was coming up, and they could always use volunteers. It was her way of saying, "I see you differently now." The following Saturday, I took her up on that unspoken invitation. I showed up at the VFW hall early, still in jeans and a hoodie, hair pulled back, ready to help flip pancakes for the veterans fundraiser. The place smelled of syrup, bacon, and community coffee, the kind that's been brewed in the same metal urn since 1980. Ruth was there, of course, standing near the sign-in table with her navy cap and her unstoppable energy. When she spotted me, her face broke into a grin. "Officer Hayes. Or do I get to call you Claire now?" "You've earned it, ma'am," I said, hugging her lightly. She winked. "Then it's Ruth. And don't call me ma'am unless I outrank you." Linda and Tom showed up about 20 minutes later, both wearing matching volunteer aprons that said, "Serving those who served." The looks on their faces when they saw Ruth and me already manning the griddle were priceless surprise. First, then, that shy sort of pride that comes when someone realizes they misjudged you. "Morning," I called cheerfully. "Hope you brought an appetite." Linda smiled nervously. "We did, but it looks like we might have to earn it." Ruth handed her a spatula. "Then grab a plate, sweetheart. No one gets out of here without flipping at least 10. Soon the kitchen was full of laughter and sizzling pancakes. Tom worked beside me, carefully ladling batter while pretending he knew what he was doing. "Haven't done this since Scouts," he muttered, flipping too soon and sending one pancake half off the griddle. Ruth caught it with surprising reflexes. "Navy training," she said with a grin. "We don't let good food go to waste." Everyone laughed, including Tom. It wasn't long before the line of hungry veterans, firefighters, and local families began stretching out the door. I poured coffee, refilled syrup bottles, and smiled as people thanked us for being there. Linda, who had started the morning carefully avoiding the sticky tables, was soon sitting among the guests, chatting easily with a group of older women about their grandkids. At one point, I saw her listening intently as a retired police sergeant told a story about his first call after 9/11. She didn't interrupt, she didn't flinch, she just listened, eyes soft, hands folded. Afterward, as we cleaned up, she turned to me and said, "I never realized how much overlap there is between what you do and what Tom's brother did. It's not just danger, it's community, it's showing up when people need you." I smiled. "That's the heart of it, Mrs. Whitmore." She hesitated, then smiled back. "Linda, please." That moment hit harder than I expected. Respect can't be demanded, it has to be earned. But grace, that's something you give away before anyone deserves it. The weeks that followed stitched our lives together in small, meaningful ways. Tom stopped by my precinct one afternoon with a box of donuts for the team. He stayed long enough to shake my sergeant's hand and thank him for looking out for my future daughter-in-law. My coworkers teased me for a week about it, but they did it with grins. Later, I invited Tom and Linda to a community safety talk I was hosting at a local church. The topic was senior driving and medication awareness, Not exactly glamorous, but practical. To my surprise, they both came, sat in the front row, and even took notes. When it ended, Tom raised his hand and asked, "What's the best thing older drivers can do to make officers' jobs easier?" I told him the truth. Just remember, we're not here to scold. We're here to make sure you get home safe. Linda clapped quietly. So did half the room. That night, after everyone left, I walked out to the parking lot with Ruth, who had attended every one of my talks since that first dinner. "You handled them perfectly," she said. "No anger, just kindness that can't be argued with." "Guess that's the only kind of revenge worth having," I said. She smiled, the kind that turns judgment into respect. As autumn crept in the Whitmores and I began seeing each other regularly. Sunday dinners became a thing, simple meals, laughter, an occasional story from work that made Tom shake his head and Linda squeeze my hand. One evening I caught Linda watching me as I helped Evan fix the porch light. When I looked back, she smiled, not politely this time, but warmly, like family. Evan noticed too. "You know she's different now," he whispered later. "You changed something in her." I shook my head. No. She just remembered something she'd forgotten what service really looks like. The next morning I found an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note from Linda on thick stationery. "Claire, thank you for helping me see that courage doesn't always wear medals. Sometimes it wears grease stains and smiles through the worry. I hope someday I can live with that kind of calm strength. Love, Linda." I read it twice, then tucked it into my desk at the station between my commendation letters. It meant more than any official praise. There were no headlines about that story, no viral videos, no medals pinned to uniforms. But in one family's dining room and later in a pancake hall filled with laughter, a quiet kind of redemption had taken root. I learned that the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's living in a way that makes them want to be better right beside you. By the time our wedding day rolled around the following spring, I no longer felt like I was walking into enemy territory. The Whitmores' home, once a fortress of polite judgment, had become a place of real warmth, the kind built through small, honest moments instead of forced smiles. The morning sun fell gently across the church lawn as guests arrived. Evan looked handsome in his suit. That same nervous grin from our first dinner, now replaced with quiet pride. Tom adjusted his tie at the end of the aisle, giving me a quick nod of approval that said everything words never could, and Linda, elegant in pale blue, was already tearing up before the ceremony even began. When the pastor asked who gave this woman to be married, Tom's voice came strong and certain. "Her own courage," he said softly, his words trembling but proud. There was a collective hush, followed by a ripple of warmth that spread through the room like sunlight through stained glass. Ruth was there too, seated in the front pew, her navy cap resting on her lap like a relic of honor. When our eyes met, she winked. I nearly laughed through my tears. After the ceremony, we all gathered in the fellowship hall for the reception. The smell of roasted chicken and buttered rolls mixed with laughter and clinking glasses. Someone from the VFW had brought a flag centerpiece, and one of my colleagues had quietly set up a donation jar labeled "For Veterans in Need" in honor of Ruth and Officer Hayes. At one point, Tom raised his glass. "To Claire," he said, "for showing us that service doesn't end when the badge comes off. It begins when you still choose to help, even when no one expects you to." Linda added, "And for reminding us that respect is earned not by what we do for show, but by how we care for people when it costs us something." Her voice cracked and she smiled through it. "You didn't just change my mind, Claire. You softened my heart." There was no need for applause, but there was some anyway. Even Ruth dabbed her eyes discreetly. Later that night, as the guests began to leave and the music quieted, I found a small envelope tucked beneath my bouquet. Inside was a note written in neat cursive. "Officer Hayes, you once said safety isn't guaranteed in any job. You were right. But you've made this family safer not from crime or fear, but from misunderstanding. Thank you for serving beyond the badge. Ruth Ellison." I smiled, folded it carefully, and tucked it beside Linda's earlier letter in my bag. Outside, the world smelled of lilac and warm rain. The parking lot lights reflected on wet pavement, and I thought about the road that had led me here, that narrow stretch of asphalt, where an old Navy nurse had been stranded, and a choice had to be made. A single small decision stopping to help had rewritten everything. It had turned fear into respect, pride into humility, and strangers into family. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real. As Evan and I drove away from the church that night, I glanced out the window and saw Ruth standing near her car waving one last time. The same woman whose tire I'd changed, whose quiet dignity had changed all of us. "Do you think she'll ever slow down?" Evan asked, smiling. "Not a chance," I said. "She's a force of nature." He reached for my hand. "You are too, you know." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "No, I'm just a cop who was late for dinner." But as the car rolled down the quiet country road, I realized the truth. Being late that night had put me exactly where I was meant to be. Weeks later, Linda and I hosted a neighborhood safety workshop together at the community center. She handled the sign-in sheet like a pro, and even Tom handed out flyers about scam prevention to the retirees with genuine enthusiasm. At one point, Ruth stopped by to deliver cookies and remind us that no meeting's complete without sugar. When the workshop ended, Linda and I sat together over coffee, the same blend she'd served that first awkward evening months before. She sighed contentedly. "You know, Claire, I used to think respect was something you demanded. Now I know it's something you earn quietly." I smiled. "It's funny how that works." "Funny," she said, then shook her head. "No, beautiful." We clinked mugs gently, not as in-law and daughter-in-law, but as equals, as women who had finally met each other where it mattered most. As I left that day, Ruth called after me from across the parking lot, her voice carrying the same humor and wisdom it always did. "Officer Hayes," she shouted, "if you're ever late again, make sure it's for the right reason." I laughed. "Always, ma'am." That night, sitting on the porch with Evan and the crickets chirping in the distance, I found myself thinking about the strange way life teaches its lessons, not through big victories, but through small, inconvenient acts of decency. The kind that ripple outward long after the moment's gone. Maybe that's the real definition of service, showing up when it's hardest, when no one will ever know, when you could have just kept driving. I took Evan's hand and looked out at the stars. "You know," I said quietly, "I think your mom was right about one thing." He turned toward me. "What's that?" "Being late isn't always a bad thing," I said. "Sometimes it's how God gives you time to find the people you were meant to meet." He smiled, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Then I hope you're late forever." We laughed together under the night sky, the sound carrying softly into the warm Virginia air. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that the world, imperfect, uncertain, and endlessly human, was exactly where it needed to be. If you've ever been judged for what you do instead of who you are, remember this: the right people will see the truth when you keep living it. So slow down, help someone, forgive faster, because sometimes being late for dinner might just bring you home.